Okay, we can start with the computer says 6:58, my clock says 7 o'clock. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Committee of the Whole, this meeting here on October 26th. Would you please all rise to salute the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you please remain standing for a moment of silence as we honor our service men and women, particularly for those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you. Well, the first thing I'd like to say this evening is that we've asked our Director of the Board of Health, Chris Webb, for an opinion on COVID and our need to be wearing masks while we're here at the council meetings. And as he's mentioned to us, you know, we each have these protective barriers between us, and we're not speaking in with anyone else. So he has already ruled that it would be safe for us to take our masks off while we're here in our protective little cocoons here. So let me be the first to take this off and be able to hear clearly what it is that everyone is saying. So you're welcome to wear it or take it off, but our advice from the Board of Health is that we can safely take these off. Okay. Let us begin by acknowledging that under the provisions of the open meeting law, those in attendance will be informed that Urban Media Arts will be recording this evening's meeting. So just be aware that there'll be audio and video recordings of this meeting. And let's go to the first order of business.
We do the roll call. Kamel. Condon. Crow. Here. DeMaria. Here. Linehan. Here. Murphy. Here. O'Malley. Sika. Here. Spatafora. Winslow. Here. Anderson.
Anderson here. Next order of business.
The guest citizens' achievement announcement. Ron Hogan will appear before the council to speak on the school funding formulas and the impact on local service delivery.
Mr. Hogan, please proceed.
All right, well, I appreciate your time tonight. I think everybody should have received a copy of the presentation I'm going to walk through tonight earlier through email, and I know that Uma is also broadcasting the slideshow to folks that may be watching from home, because I think it's a pretty important topic, and I think by the time we're done tonight, you will also. So what I'm hoping to shed some light on tonight is how the education funding formulas work and the impact it has on us being able to fund other city services. So I think you all, probably more than anybody, get the questions from residents all the time about some of the things that we seemingly can't do that we see some communities around us being able to do, whether it's being able to provide trash services without having to charge a fee, whether it's investing more in our parks, whether it's funding our schools at more than the bare minimum level. There's no shortage of services that I think our residents sometimes wonder why we may not be able to do, and other communities that appear, at least from the outside, to be similar to us are able to. And I'm hoping to shed some light on that with this presentation tonight. So I think at the end, you're going to find my conclusion is simply this, that the formula that the state uses on determining what it is that we as a city can afford to pay towards the cost of education is absolutely disconnected from the revenues that we have to pay those from. You'll see when I make comparisons to some other communities that the amount that we have to pay as compared to our revenues when compared to other cities, it just doesn't make sense. So what I'm going to focus on, I'm going to dive a little bit into two particular communities to compare, but then I'm going to expand it to every community around us as well as all the gateway cities. But I'm really going to focus at first on Malden, Everett, Revere, because quite frankly, we have a lot of similarities. We're not perfect, but we all have populations that are between 50 and 65,000. We've got household incomes that are right in the same area, and so they're good communities to look at when we're trying to figure out a topic like this. So one of the things you have to understand about how education funding works is it's really I'm going to oversimplify it, but it's a three-step process that the Department of Education goes through every year. The first is for every community, they come up with what's called the foundation budget. And that is the department determining for the City of Malden's district how much it costs, how much we must spend to provide what is considered to be a baseline quality education for everybody being educated in our school system. So they tell us what that number is. It's a bare minimum, it's not a maximum, but that's the foundation budget. It's somewhere around $100 million for Malden. So that's the first step. What do we have to spend? The second is, how much can Malden afford to pay towards that? What's our piece of that pie? Think of it as a glass. They determine how big the glass is. They determine how much we can fill that glass up. That's the second piece. That's our required contribution. And then the third piece, they fill up the glass with Chapter 70 aid so that at the end of the day, our piece plus their piece funds the foundation budget. That's an overly simplistic view of how it works, but that is truly an exercise that they go through every year for every one of 350 communities across the Commonwealth. And it's that middle piece, our piece, what we can afford to pay, that's really the focus of my presentation. You may have all heard about the Student Opportunity Act. There was a tremendous amount of effort put in by the state legislative folks to try to modernize that foundation budget piece of this. That's been dealt with. That was antiquated. They've updated those formulas. I'm specifically speaking to how much of that we can afford and how much of that the state can pay as compared to other communities. So again, I mentioned that the term that the state uses is the target local contribution. That's the amount they determine we can pay. There's a second term that you're going to hear, and this is really important, which is the required local contribution. The target is where they believe we can get to. So they'll do the math and they say, Malden, we think you can afford to pay, in the case of this fiscal year, $56.8 million towards education. Right now, we're below that number, and they are slowly getting us up to that number. But this is really important. In the current fiscal year, we were required to put $49.3 million towards the cost of education. But their formulas tell them that the budget that you all just passed in June, we should have been able to allocate another $7.5 million towards education and pull it from other areas of our budget. So the target is where we're trying to get to. The required is what they're making us get to this year, and each year they tried to bridge that gap and finally bring the two of them together. So it's kind of an important distinction where you've got the two different numbers, but either way, whether you're looking at the required or the target, the point still will be made. So this sheet that you're looking at here on this slide is, and I'm not going to go through this, but this is the exercise the Department of Education goes through every year to determine how much it is that we can pay. And they really just take two simplistic numbers to look at every community across the Commonwealth. They look at the EQV of all of our property. Okay, think of that as the market value with some adjustments made to it to normalize communities. But essentially, it's market value of all the property across the city. And $1 of property is $1 of property. It doesn't matter if it's industrial, residential, commercial. They smash it all together and say all the Malden property, in this case here, was worth a little bit over, if I could see it, I think it says $9 billion. I don't really know. I don't have my glasses on. But they come up with a number for the property in Malden, and then they also get information from the Department of Revenue of the income from all of our residents. They get it off their tax forms. Everybody that's filed a tax form using our zip code is a Malden resident. They smash that all together, and they use those two indicators to determine how much it is that we can afford to pay towards education by applying factors to each one of those. And it's a formula that's existed since the 90s. Its intent was to try to determine the wealth of a community. The issue that I'm going to point out tonight is it's not connected to the actual revenues that the community brings in. And last time I looked, we can only pay our bills with revenues, not with property value or with income from our residents. So I'm going to start by doing that comparison with Malden, Revere, and Everett. I'm going to start going left to right. So if you compare the three communities, you can see that we have, on a per capita basis, we bring in the least amount of money of the three communities that I'm talking about here for tax and local receipts, right? That's all, essentially everything that we bring in minus state aid, because I break that out separately. So we bring in the least. If you go to the middle column, we also get the least amount per resident in state aid. And so if you go to the far right, you can see that on an all revenue basis, right off the bat, when you look at us compared to the two communities I'm looking at here, there is a significant difference between us and Everett, which surprises a lot of folks. And there's a fairly sizable difference between us and Revere, just in the amount of revenue that we're dealing with on a per capita basis. So keep that in mind as we go and look at what the department says we can pay, that I just set the foundation that we bring in less money on a per capita basis. What this slide shows is the percentage of that revenue that I just talked about, that the formulas determine that we can pay towards that cost of education. So you look in the case of Malden, when we get to that target level, we will be at almost 40% of our revenue that we're required to put towards paying that piece of the education cost. You look at Everett as an example, it's less than 24%, and you look at Revere right in the middle. But that's an enormous difference. When you think of our revenue base, 1% is an absolute enormous difference, and when you get to the difference between 39 and 24%, you know, it truly is a monumental difference between us and some of these other communities. So let me further just highlight it by showing you just the gross dollars. So here you see the revenue that each one of the communities brings in gross dollars. Malden, Revere, and Everett. Malden and Revere are pretty close. Everett brings in about $22 million more in tax revenue. Go to the far right, though, and look at the required contribution towards education. We've got the lowest revenue and the highest expectation of what it is that we can afford to pay towards education. They're out of whack. It's literally flip-flopped. We've got the least amount of money available and the expectation that we fund the most towards education. And again, what I'm getting at with all this is what it leaves us left over when the dust all settles to budget for everything else that we all deal with every budget season that our residents are looking for from us. So what I'm going to do is then take the resulting information and break it down on a per capita basis. The underlying assumption of my presentation tonight is that population drives cost. The more residents we have, not perfect, but the more residents we have, the more police we need, the more fire we need, the more DPW services we need, you know, et cetera, more local service. Not a perfect, but I would say that it's the only way to normalize different communities is to look at it on a per resident basis. And so that's what I'm going to break it down. And I'm going to start to show you some comparison communities. And what I'm going to show you is after we fund education using these formulas with the amount that we're told we have to fund, how much is left per resident to do everything else compared to some of these other communities. So this is the first set that I'm doing a comparison to, which is our neighboring communities. Revere, Medford, Melrose, Somerville, Everett, right? Geographically based, these are the communities that we all sort of think of because they're around us. And as you can see, we, by far, it's not even close in a lot of cases. We've got less money left after funding education with these formulas than any of these cities surrounding us. It's not even close. Using this example that you're seeing, a $100 difference when you think about the fact that we've got 65,000 residents is $6.5 million. So if we just had $100 more per resident, we'd have $6.5 million more that we could use to try to meet some of the other needs that our residents have or some of the other expectations that they have. So that's just the difference between us and Revere. It's about a $150 difference. Look at Everett. I think folks have always been surprised to you know, I think people have always thought we're somewhat comparable. They've got almost twice what we have left over per resident to be able to deliver non-education city services. And so it's just important for folks to realize when they hear of other cities doing some of these things, this is where the money's coming from. And sometimes folks are thinking that it's a matter of folks not making something a priority. The reality, as you can see, we're just dealing with a smaller pool of money. So the next comparison I do is the same thing, per resident as compared to gateway cities. I think everybody knows there's 26 gateway cities. They tend to be cities that are you know, economic engines, but have similar demographics, and I think everybody knows what the list of them are. So I looked at all 26 and did this math where I pulled the data in terms of all their revenue, their required spending, their populations, and looked at where Malden fit within those communities in terms of what we have left per resident to deliver city services after education. We're second from the bottom. Second from the bottom, behind only Lawrence, just ahead of Lowell, Haverhill, Lynn. The average gateway community, the average, has about $1,600 per resident. If we just had the average, we'd have $25 million more in our budget to be able to do other things across the city, eliminate trash, whatever it may be. We'd have $25 million more if we could just be average. I'm going to show you the top 5 communities. Again, these are all gateway cities. These are communities that are all classified in a similar way to what we are, and you look at the number that is left over on a per-resident basis to deliver other city services as compared to what Malden has. In a lot of cases, it's almost double. Enormous, enormous difference. Does anybody have any questions on any of those before you want to wait? I'm happy to take them as you. What's that? All right, let me keep going because So as I mentioned, the corollary of this required local contribution number is what we get in Chapter 78. The more that we pay and are required to pay, the less we get in Chapter 78. The more that we get, the less we have to pay, the higher we're going to get in Chapter 78. So this is the flip side of that, is because we're expected to pay more than, I believe, we can afford to pay, what you'll see is our Chapter 70 numbers on a per-student basis are much less than these other communities. So if you look at Malden, Revere, and Everett, and I looked at FY20 and 22, you can see significant differences in terms of how much we get in Chapter 78 per student. And it got worse between 20 and 22. A lot of the examples I just used were from FY20 because it's the last full year that's been reported on to the Department of Revenue. But FY22, Chapter 70 information exists because they published that early. So as much as the information I just walked through for 20 was bad, it didn't get better in the last couple of years. It actually got worse. So you can see we're significantly below communities that have more revenue than us. I just went through that. Revere and Everett have more or equal revenue, but we're getting significantly less per student for Chapter 70. This is maybe the sort of more depressing of the tables, I think, in the presentation, which shows just in gross dollars what's happened to our Chapter 70 number over the last 2 years. So Malden's Chapter 78 has gone up about $207,000 the last couple of years. Our neighbors in Revere have gone up about $10 million. Our neighbors in Everett have gone up about 8.7. You go a little bit further, Lynn is about 12.3, and I just picked Brockton because they're another gateway community at almost $22 million. So the differences because of this formula that in my mind overestimates what we can afford to pay, the impact of that is coming through in Chapter 78 that trails other similar communities. So what are we doing? Well, listen, there's no easy answer to this, folks. I mean, we've had conversations with our state delegation. The reality is I can sit there and point to 4 or 5 communities like us that are really hurt by this. And that means there's probably 345 that don't see it as a problem, right? So figuring out how to approach this from a strategic perspective is not going to be all that easy. What we are starting to do is try to build a coalition with some of the other cities that are in a similar situation to us. We've had meetings with the folks in Haverhill, the folks in Lynn, and we're trying to, this is not adversarial between us and the state delegation, it's educational. It's trying to collaborate with them on figuring out how to go about actually being able to achieve a change that would address this, knowing that there are a lot of communities that are probably okay with the way it works because they're on the other side of the equation to where we're at. But we're going through that process. I've met with the Department of Education, the Department of Revenue. It's about just continuing to try to build awareness, make sure that they understand that we've got concerns over it. I think this presentation is all about getting you all to be part of that effort and also having our residents understand that these are the limitations that we all work within each and every day, right? These are the revenues that are left over after a formula tells us what it is that we need to pay towards education, and we do the best we can within those until we can change the rules of the game. So we're going to start that process, but I was hoping that by laying this groundwork, you all would at least have an opportunity to ask some questions and then, provide any guidance that you may have. So.
Ron, we do have some lights that are lit up, but let me ask from the chair, if I may. So, we all have gotten questions from our constituents of, how come our roads aren't as good as Everett? How come in Everett they've been able to pick up the trash with the bigger containers and there is no fee for that? And so what you're pointing out is that this formula has benefited those a city like Everett, where it has disadvantaged a city like Malden.
That's right.
So how did we get there? And Yeah, how did we get there? Why are we in this position? Why wasn't the formula, why isn't the formula more equitable?
Yeah.
And what do we do about making it equitable, was my first question.
So what I've said to the Department of Revenue, I said, you know, you've got, in the Department of Education, you've come up with this formula to try to figure out what it is that we can afford to pay. And it goes all the way back to the 90s. And I would argue it probably went back before all the centralized reporting that exists, you know, that exists right now. I've said to them, you don't need to guess as to what we can afford to pay. You know what our revenues are. We have to report them just like every other community, you know, through the Department of Revenue. So it's a metric that determines what we can pay that's not tied to revenue. I talked about EQV earlier. We've got an EQV of I'm going to use a round number, $9 billion. Everett's got an EQV of, I want to say it's 5.7, call it 6. It's truly significantly less. But they generate more revenue from that EQV than we do. So right off the bat, you invalidate the use of EQV as a wealth indicator because it's not tied to the revenue. So the answer is that the formula really doesn't, in some cases, it's maybe across the board, it feels to folks like it averages out, but if you're last or second to last like we are, it feels like it vastly overestimates what it is that we can pay because it doesn't use the two things that I think should be taken into account is what do we really have available for resources and how many residents do we need to serve, right? We have 65,000 residents that require services. What do we have for revenue and how many people do we have to serve? And I think, Counselor, it's just because it's been this way for a long time. This part of the formula was out of scope when they did the Student Opportunity Act, okay, because they were trying to take on so much with the Student Opportunity Act. They did not even address this part of the equation. And this is all about trying to say we're willing to be part of addressing this equation because it's important to us.
So obviously, if we look at the total value of all of the property in Malden, the real property in Malden, that's not necessarily giving us money into the coffers for us to spend. Or if we're looking at what the IRS has reported for our combined income, those two figures aren't putting money into the city of Malden's general fund for spending. That's the point. That's your point.
That's my point. They're at this point in time, they're indicators that we can't monetize. Let's be honest, right? Our EQV is going up 2.5% a year. At this point in time, you know, there's no Prop 2.5 override happening in any community. So our EQV is going to generate what it generates. And we don't have we're not New York City. We don't have a local income tax, right? So the income, well, it's interesting to know. It's nothing we can generate revenue off of. So it leaves us with a number that just isn't tied to reality. That's why it's 40% for us and 25% for Everett and everything in between for every other community.
Let me let some of the councilors get in. Let's go to Councilor Kamel. I think he was the first to push.
Yes. Ron, thank you very much for this. This is very interesting information. You know, I love numbers.
I know, yeah. Just like, I'll send you the data spreadsheet that I have with every community in it. It's, yeah.
So, all right, so I'm in a position where I can probably ask questions that irritate people a little more than some of the others who are running for re-election, so I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna play devil's advocate, right? So the required contribution is based on income and property value.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an underlying assumption under there. The more you have, the more you can pay. And you said it's not tied to our revenue.
Right.
But our revenue is locally determined. We determine as a community, not necessarily as a government, because there are many, like I said, you mentioned Proposition 2.5 right there. There are many things you would have to go through in terms of going to the community and saying, look, here's, you know, you can choose to keep the rates the way they are, or you can look at what we're paying versus other cities. And so for me, I would be curious about things that might not be in here. So you might not know these, so if you don't mind me asking a couple questions. So like our Prop 2.5 ceiling.
Yeah.
So we talk about Revere and Everett. Let's just take Everett versus Malden. What do you know what, and I should know off the top of my head and I don't, what our Prop 2.5 ceiling is and what Everett's is?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we tax to the max levy every year. So
The increase every year, but as a property, there's 2.5 figures into that formula twice, right?
Yeah.
It's how much you can increase every year without going to a Prop 2.5 override. And then there's the total
But
ceiling.
we go into each year
Right.
at the cap.
At
We
the
have
cap
two-
or increase.
Both. So we go into it having maxed out the tax levy that we can tax. We go up the 2.5%, and then we end that year the same thing. You know, plus or minus 50 grand, which is usually just sort of rounding for a tax rate, right? It depends on, but we tax 100% of what we can. You asked the question, Counselor, so I'm going to answer it.
Yeah.
The city of Everett does not.
Okay.
So I just use an example that shows you where we're at in terms of revenue.
So in terms of revenue that we collect as compared to our property value, it's 2.5%?
There is no more meat on that bone for us to generate revenue from short of a Prop 2.5 override.
Right, I understood, absolutely, that's what
But
I'm
some
getting at.
communities don't. Some communities don't tax to their full levy. They've got millions and millions and millions of dollars that they could generate more revenue from by just sort of getting up closer to that top levy. We don't. We are
We're already there.
We are already there. That's correct. So that low-hanging fruit is not there for us, and most other urban communities are in the same situation as us. They're maxing what it is that they can tax to start with.
And so Everett is interesting in the fact, and I think we've talked about this before, and I think Councilor Condon, I know you've brought it up and others have brought it up, the proportion of our property that's residential versus commercial compared to a city like Everett.
Yeah.
And in my head, I have like a, you know, informal number, but I don't know if it's exactly right. So I know ours is something close to 80-20, right? 80 residential, 20
Yeah, I don't, they definitely have more industrial.
There's this flipped, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not flipped. They're still, you know, more generated through, you know, through residential taxes, but they absolutely have more industrial and commercial than we do. And that speaks to it. The other thing is, some of this goes back to just when Prop 2.5 started, where were your tax rates, right? Because it just goes up 2.5% every year. We've got X amount in property with the rate of 17, and somebody else has a lower number with the rate of 22. You know what I mean? It really just depends on where you started to some degree, too.
Okay, we're going to let Councilor Lenahan get in here, and we'll come back to you. Councilor Lenahan.
Thank you, Mr. President. In some ways, I had the same questions as Councilor Kamel, actually. I was wondering about if we've levied up to that limit, but additionally, how does the new growth compare in a place like Everett? Like, I feel like they have more new growth that they can tap into than we have, which is the only other place that is fungible, right?
Yeah. So there's no doubt that things like the casino in the last few years have added to new growth, but this disparity goes back long before that more recent phenomenon. But yes, we add somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million in new growth every year that gets added on above and beyond the 2.5 increase. But again, there's no meat left on that bone, if you will. We're taxing sort of whatever is available to us as a tax levy in order to generate. And that's sort of the argument I've had back to the folks at the state level is we're doing everything we can unless you believe that a Prop 2.5 override is something that's a tool in our toolbox that hasn't been used, and I can tell you most urban districts don't, right? But short of that, we're not taxing something and sort of holding back anything for a rainy day. We're at that max.
But we do have a pretty large rainy day fund, right?
Yep.
I mean, I know it's not quite exactly what we're talking about here, but I guess if I'm the state, I'm looking at our wealth by our income, right? You said it's $9 billion. It's the wealth is the real estate and your wealth. If you present this to the state, they're going to say you're not leveraging your wealth to fund the schools adequately. So what's our answer to that?
Well, how would we leverage the wealth more?
Well, wouldn't you think that they would say that, though? That's the only movement that there is, right?
So the only answer would be if you believe that a Prop 2.5 override is a tool that is available and would be welcomed by our residents. I don't.
I hear what you're saying on that.
That would be the only, you'd have to believe
Yeah.
that is something that we haven't, taken advantage of and something that we should. There is no other way to take that value and monetize it beyond what we've already done. It's not like, in a particular area, we've gone up 1.5% instead of 2.5.
Right.
We go up the max. So the idea behind these formulas is that it's supposed to be an indicator of your ability to raise revenue. But again, as you sit here every year doing a budget, what are we not doing to sort of maximize that ability? Because I'm not aware of it where, I'm not sure if our residents feel like we're leaving a lot of that on the table either,
And so if, you know, assuming that our legislative delegation, you said there's this coalition forming, if they're on board, the other thing I would be thinking about is like, why not advocate for more unrestricted local aid? Because it sort of feels like an apples to oranges comparison. Like fire trucks in schools are not the same thing. Excellent schools cost money, so do public safety vehicles, right? So why not advocate for more unrestricted local aid that could be put to whatever we need?
So what I've advocated for is at least trying to look at this. So they're apples and oranges, but one leads to the other, right? So if we start with $10 and we have to spend $4, that determines what's left for the other thing. So that's where they absolutely positively belong in the same sentence. What I have said in my conversations with that delegation is maybe our approach is to look at some sort of circuit breaker type aid where if the amount of money that's left for the community after figuring out this education formula that has some flaws in it isn't enough to deliver baseline services at some level, that there's some other local aid that kicks in to make up for it. So that would be another way to approach it. Instead of changing the school formula, you say, let's apply that. And if after all is said and done, there's some communities that just aren't left with enough to do some basic things, there's sort of another, you know, there's a kicker that kicks in at the equivalent of circuit breaker. But again, that's early. You know, it is all about collaborating with them because it's, they look at this, they agree there's a problem, but none of us look and say, oh, there's an easy answer for this, you know?
So let's let Councilor Murphy in on this one. Councilor Murphy. Councilors who have already spoken, you've got a chance to speak again. Let's let some of the other councilors speak. Councilor Murphy.
Bring you fast forward maybe 24 months from now. I'm looking at the real estate portfolio at $9 billion. 9 billion, you said?
Yeah, it's $9 billion.
9 billion thereabouts. So I believe, you know, we all know that real estate prices over the past 18 to 24 months have gone up substantially within the city of Malden, and we also know from dealing with our assessor that we're usually run about 18 months behind in catch up. So how do you feel, you know, if we still use these indicators, that the recent increase in our property values, which has been substantial, will play out 2 or 3 years down the road? Will it make this situation worse?
Yeah, so it's a great question, but I think that we'll be in no better or worse situation than any other community. I think everybody's EQV will go up with the market.
Okay.
And the way the formulas are structured, they're trying to generate about half of the local contribution off of property and about half of it off of income. So they sort of play around with those ratios each year to get there. So I don't think it's going to help or hurt us because I think we'll, unless for some reason, you know, we realize a disproportionate increase in, you know, in market value of our property that is, you know, dissimilar to our neighbors. But I don't think that's the case. So I think that number, and if you look at this number from a couple of years ago, that's what happened. It jumped up, you know. But everybody's kind of jumped up, so it didn't hurt us any more than it hurt anybody else. It just moved that number higher.
Okay, and then my second question is with the, basically our apartments complexes that have been built in the city recently that seem to attract, you know, a young professional type person that can afford that rent. How do you see that impacting this particular formula going forward?
Yeah, so this formula is absolutely disadvantageous for properties like that. So when you take a dense development with some high earners and you put them all into a single property, right? So I had done an analysis on the, I think it was the 350 Main property a couple of years ago because it was for sale and they had listed some demographic information. So if you plug in 275 people living in one property making higher than average income, and then you add in the market value of the property, it almost adds to our local contribution the same amount that our taxes generate from that property. So it doesn't leave much left over just because it's a dense property of high earners that get plugged into this equation that in a lot of ways penalizes dense properties, you know, of high earners. So those are not as, you know, you might look at the tax revenue that comes in gross and think that that's money that's available, but this formula may not get you today or tomorrow because it does have some safeguards built into it, so it doesn't whack you overnight. But eventually, the value of that building and all the income of somebody that you know, the folks that live in that building get applied to this equation, and they do hurt almost to the tune of the property taxes that come in from it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilor Di Maria.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Ron, for coming in front of us tonight. I have a couple of questions. Malden has a wonderful special needs program in our schools. Does that affect any of these guidelines at all? Because, I mean, when I served school committee, I was told 93% of the school budget goes to our special needs department.
Yeah, so that's factored into the foundation budget, right? So the foundation budget and what we can pay are looked at completely independently.
Okay.
So the population by grade and by services that they're required to, or that the students need, that's what drives that foundation budget, how much we have to spend to provide a quality education. Completely separate from that is this, how much of that can we pay? That number could almost go up endlessly.
Okay.
What we can pay is what we can pay. So I'm focused on that second piece, but it brings up a good point. This is not about us versus the schools. This is in fact something we're united on, because what we've said to the school department is, if we can have more left over, then we have more to even help them fund above the baseline net school spending level. Right now, we barely meet that bare minimum because there's nothing left, you know, when we're done. So this is about us and them collaborating on this as well, because it's not a matter of taking money from them. It's a matter of trying to have our piece of that pie be a little smaller so that we can either give them
Help
more
them.
and do some other things.
Right.
Yeah, one of those things is to help them.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Second question, in comparison, I just wonder if, which is something we've tried to dig into about 2-3 years ago, with our tax exempt properties.
Yeah.
Does that make a difference with our tax revenue compared to, say, Everett? I mean, do we all have 65 or they have, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd have to look at, it certainly is part of the equalized value, right? So it feeds into that piece. I don't know if we have a disproportionate number of those properties compared to, you know, as compared to some of the other cities, because to your point, it's value that isn't necessarily generating income, but that's something certainly we can take a look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know how we compare to the communities that we've looked at in terms of those properties.
Yeah, because we do have a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
we do.
thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Crowe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just off of Councilor DiMaria's question around, you know, we have a lot of conversations, all right, wait a minute. Besides the nonprofits, sort of the educational and the religious, as we've had those conversations more recently, you know, so those properties really go towards sort of our, the 9 billion, because that they could be big properties and worth a lot, but they really don't support our income thing. So is there, I mean, it probably is only a small piece in the grand scheme of things, but there are some pretty large properties, and even like the hospital site, which is sort of there, and I know that it's privately owned, but not really generating what it could be generating, but the property value really goes to our wealth.
Right. It does, but keep in mind that if tomorrow a church bought the Jefferson apartment building across the street that's generating income, that income doesn't go away, it gets spread across the rest of the taxpayers, right? So it's not that income gets dropped off the rolls, it just gets passed back to everybody else. It's the way that you know, real estate taxes work. So unless somebody built something from scratch and it started out as non-taxable, more often than not, what happens is somebody buys a property that's on the tax rolls, it gets turned over to a nonprofit, and then sort of everybody else picks up a little piece of that pie to make up for the fact that came off the tax roll. So it's a little different than sometimes folks, you know, think of it. You don't necessarily lose it, you know, off the top of the hat. It gets spread around.
All set, Counselor Crowe? Counselor Crowe, you're all set? Counselor Winslow.
Yeah, you know, I know there was so much focus, you know, over the past 5 years on the Student Opportunity Act, and I know, you know, Senator Lewis was one of the leading people on the Education Committee, and Rep. Altrino's very much on the House side. So I'm kind of mystified of, you know, that why was this part of the formula not addressed? Do you have any sense? Is that something we really need to explore more with our delegation of, was this just one issue too far to get the Student Opportunity Act? Was it raised at that time and just didn't get addressed? Is that what's what's our sense of kind of what we would need to do politically to overcome that, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, Council. So they, I think you hit the nail on the head. It was sort of one step too far. It was taking on the foundation budget. Part of it was an enormous task in and of itself, and putting this part of the equation in play probably would have made it difficult for them to make any progress on the bigger piece, right? So what they did was, part of the Student Opportunity Act asked that the Department of Education sort of do some work and provide some recommendations on this front, and that's a report that's available on their website. It doesn't really land in any conclusive place. I would say that it didn't move that ball forward, but that's how it was addressed, was by asking them to look at this. And, they put out a report, but it certainly didn't come to any conclusion. It more spoke about the topic and reported on it. So that's out there.
So in the discussions of the Student Opportunity Act, it wasn't like there was a proposal that Malden advanced that just didn't get
No.
incorporated, it just, and it sounds like Desi looked at the issue, but there wasn't a recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I know there was at least kind of 4 major topics, and I know one was the educational costs. And so I think the initial round of funding didn't include that. There was some rejigging and forming, but then finally and just prior to COVID, we were gonna, the legislature had voted on that, and then it kind of got held, but I think we are now, I mean, that's why we're seeing this big discrepancy in revenues now, that that money did come through, it just didn't come through in the way for Malden, because of this other issues, so.
Right.
So, okay, that was just an issue that just did not get talked to enough and focused on the student.
They acknowledged it, and they asked the Department of Education to sort of take that ball and run with it. But I think what we're asking is that we take that further. Maybe it's another commission, and that's similar to what happened with the Student Opportunity Act. I mean, there's no doubt that there's folks that, like you said, led by Senator Lewis, that spent a tremendous amount of time on that aspect of it, and probably just hearing this desire that we have to look at this piece are going, and I don't necessarily blame them, but it's our job to see if we can get some attention on this piece, because it is important to us, and it's a little bit of a train coming in the other direction, if you will,
Thanks, no, I just was always mystified when, what the number, we did not get a big boost like the Everest and Revere's out of the Student Opportunity Act, it just, but yeah, I guess, it is this countervailing thing, so, it's all right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor Condon.
Thank you, Council President. Ron, you touched on owner-occupied, non-owner occupied. Bottom line, the burden's shifting to the non-owner occupied versus the owner occupied. But bottom line is, that number is still going to be 2.5% above our tax levy, plus any new growth.
That's right.
Is it, because, isn't that true?
That's right. There's nothing being left on the table with that equation. It's purely a shift from this left hand to this right hand, but at the end of the day, if you put them together, you're going to get to the same exact place.
Yeah, because I talked to owner-occupied people and what they're paying for their taxes versus the non-owner occupied. And they're in basically a business of renting out the apartments with these rents today.
Yep.
And there's quite a difference, and I think people appreciate that side of it. But we're kind of stuck here because it'd be easy to blame our state delegation, but I don't think that's the case. I think things got out of control years ago. Now you have a situation where you probably got 20 cities over here and 340 over there that are quite happy.
Yep.
And you're not going to get them to change their vote to vote against the formulas. So,
No, this is not a problem our state delegation created. It goes
No.
back to the 90s. They've been absolutely collaborative, and none of us sit here knowing what the answer is, but we're working together on it, right? So it's just, there's no easy answer, because as you said, there's a lot of folks on one side and maybe a few on the other side. We have to figure out how to see if we can address our need without hurting anybody in a way that, creates some resistance. But, they're absolutely interested in helping us do that, even if none of us at this point in time know the right way to go about it,
all right, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Condon. Yeah, right. I noticed in your writings here, you talked about you're not looking to knock those other cities down, because you figure that they're getting what they need. what we need to do, what we need to have is a strategy of bringing us up to where they are and where we're not fighting against them. But that's the only way, as Councilor Condon points out. You know, we're not going to have all these communities who are being benefited by the formula to support something that's going to take it away from them. So we certainly understand that. Councilor DiMaria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a final question. I know that the City Council has, over the years, tried to identify revenue and how can we help with the revenue without overtaxing our residents by, you know, for example, bringing in cannabis and your parking department. And, you know, we've wrapped our arms around the trash program. What do we do to help solve this? What is our next step
Yeah, so.
to do this? I mean, this is a great presentation. This is all factual. So how do we move forward with?
You know, if I knew that, I would have led with that, Counselor. I mean, no, all joking aside, there is no easy answer, right? So I look at everything like this as being a multi-step process of first getting everybody on the same page and acknowledging what the problem is. I've had many conversations with Senator Lewis's offices and Rep. Altrino and Rep. Donato, just kind of getting us all on the same page, because no one's really looked at it the way that we've tried to look at it. So I truly think it's a layering process to just take it a step at a time, and along the way hope that a solution identifies itself that doesn't create a problem for anybody else, but allows us to, to address our side of things. So I don't think the answer is just trying to figure out what more we can do on a local level to try to sort of tax or fee our residents, because I don't know that a lot of them can afford that, quite frankly. I think we have to offset an overstated contribution level with something else coming in on the backside. And as I said, it's sort of the circuit breaker concept that says, okay, that formula is that formula, and changing it's too difficult. But if it leaves anybody below a baseline level, let's throw them a little bit. I mean, that's easier said than done, but I think it's that, not looking at the local level, because I don't know there's a lot that we're not doing that our neighboring communities that I've used as comparisons are doing, right? In terms of, taxing folks or charging fees for things. I'm not aware of anything,
Well, we're here to help.
I think this is the start of that process, I think,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kamel.
Sorry, just one more. Sorry, you're looking at me. I don't think it's too hard one, but we mentioned, and I don't know if you were just maybe comparing order of magnitude, but you mentioned 20 municipalities where this is probably, I don't know if it's 20 or 40, whatever it is, where this is an issue versus maybe 330, 300, whatever, that it's not. Do we know which ones those are, or is that just sort of like an estimate? And my my follow-up would be like, yeah, but how many people live in those cities? How dense are those cities, and how much of the percentage of the population of the state does that actually represent?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So what I looked at was all the gateway communities. I didn't go to every, but the gateway communities, I thought, and there were a lot of the over 50,000 communities, so it represents a lot of the population, right? But you definitely have this barbell effect, right? You've got a lot of folks in the middle. I showed you the top 5 and I showed you the bottom 5. Our focus now is trying to get some consensus with the bottom 5 to say we're the ones that are, that try to collaborate and hopefully come up with a solution that doesn't offend the other 90%.
That was sort of the idea, the safety in numbers. So you might be a minority of number of municipalities, but you could still have, pressure in the House because that could represent quite a few representatives at the at population levels. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Ron, for this. I was privy to kind of be given a little preview of this a while ago, and I do think that where we've gone, none of the information's really changed. It's still a problem. One of the things that would be interesting is finding out what the population of these communities are. How many, hundreds of thousands of people, how many hundreds of thousands of children are impacted by the fact that our formula is not working out for us. And definitely having that group of state reps and state senators to kind of advocate on our behalf. Please keep us posted on how we can help.
Absolutely.
I think it's a great first step.
Yeah, and I have, if anybody wants the full data set, I've got the population for all the communities. I can break it down by, the U.S. Census has got tremendous information out there, but I can send it out, and if somebody doesn't want to read it, just delete it. But it does show you it's all sort of build from the bottom up, you know? I mean, I'm a numbers geek, so it's fascinating to me, but I tried to break it down into charts because I think it just really shows, you know, at the end of the day. And, you know, I hate, and I guess I'll leave it, I don't want to come across as the whiny Malden, right? That's not the intent here, and I think we tried to be careful with that delegation to not come across as unappreciative of all the hard work they did on the Student Opportunity Act and day in and day out that they advocate. But this is a topic that has kind of been a little bit off to the side. But the fact that they asked it to be addressed as part of the Student Opportunity Act tells me that they know it's probably something that needs to be looked at. And so we just want to be the catalyst to try to say, okay, let's go from that to really digging into it. If you want to form a commission like you did with the student, you know, sign me up, right? We'll do some work. So it's really just trying to take it to that next step and figure out, Rome wasn't built in a day. The Student Opportunity Act took years before they finally got to something. So I wouldn't set any expectation that there's some, you know, budget appropriation next year for this, but, you know, there's an old saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. When's the next best time? Today, right? So let's try to plant a tree and see if we can get this thing to grow and make some progress with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ron Hogan, for a great presentation, great bit of information that we've received tonight, and I think you've said it so perfectly. We're not trying to knock anyone else down, but let's see if we can bring us up and see if we can have a strategy that can get allies, that we level the playing field, because right now the playing field is not level. And so when our constituents are asking us, how come some of these other cities are able to do things that we are not? Is it because of our poor planning, or what's the story? Right. You know, it's because of what you're pointing out. Right. And I think this has been very valuable information, so thank you very much. I don't see any other lights on, so anyone who's wanted to ask any questions has had that opportunity. And again, Ron, thank you very much for appearing here before us. Next order of business.
Paper 462-21, Commission on Energy Efficiency and Sustainability on Electric Aggregation.
And that is Councilor Kamel for the paper. Councilor Kamel, let's see.
Thank you. So I'm bringing this forward as the council representative on the Commission of Energy Efficiency and Sustainability. So the ask tonight is simply to refer this to Finance for a further discussion. The EEC has, we have to get the sustainability in there. We still call it EEC, but I guess it's EESC now. Has formed a presentation on this to go over all the fine points. But tonight I can just sort of describe it briefly. Explored the EEC some time ago, and it made sense for a lot of reasons to put it on the back burner during the height of the pandemic. As it has to do with energy prices a lot, but now as everything's coming back up and energy costs are rising again, we want to take a look at that. So these arrangements can be purely financial, but of course, coming from the EEC, there can probably going to be an environmental angle on it, right? So these can also include requirements for renewable energy to be within that portfolio of energy that the city is aggregating and buying on behalf of the residents. Or I should say, not buying on behalf of the residents, but locking in a price on behalf of the residents. And the presentation would also discuss potential timelines and what various votes would mean at different times. For example, the first vote would be likely to just, not likely, the first vote would just allow the mayor to start looking at the issue. Wouldn't necessarily commit us to anything. So the ask tonight is to refer this to the Finance Committee, and I will move as such.
So on Councilor Kamel's motion that we refer this to the Finance Committee, seconded by Councilor Lenahan, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. That paper will be referred to the Finance Committee. Next order of business.
Paper 463-21, order that the appropriation enumerated below, being in the amount of $50,000, be appropriated from the Community Preservation Act Fund for the following project: Wallace Park restoration. Total appropriation $50,000.
On Councilor Murphy's paper. Councilor Murphy for the paper.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, this is, and I see Michelle Romero is here in the audience if we need her to speak to this, but on Friday, right before the deadline, our city clerk heard from the CPC committee that the bids had been opened and they were short of the money that we had approved at the close of our session in last June. This is a very time-sensitive matter, so I am going to move that we suspend docket rules here this evening to discuss this. I would hope that I would have your support because Wallace Park, if we don't pass this tonight, it will stop the work on Wallace Park, or it won't be able to start. So I don't know if you'd like to hear from Ms. Romero before we suspend docket rules, or we'll take the vote. Okay, we'll send them. So I
So
would
on
make a
council-
motion to suspend docket rules.
On Councilor Murphy's motion to suspend docket rules, seconded by Councilor DiMaria, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Those docket rules are suspended.
And I think Councilor O'Malley has a question.
Someone want to speak on that? Councilor O'Malley?
I just wanted to clarify that we weren't suspending docket rules. We were suspending council rules.
Council rules, sorry. Thank you. Council rules. Okay. And I'd like to invite Ms. Romero up here to just give us the specifics of what happened.
Michelle Romero, please come to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening. Michelle Romero, City Planner and Liaison to the Malden Historical Commission. Thank you very much for hearing this tonight. As Councilor Murphy said, it's extremely time sensitive. I was here back in June and you were very generous to award the appropriation of $150,000 for this project. This is the Wallace Memorial Park Wall Restoration Project. It involves rehabilitation and restoration of the wall that surrounds the historic landmark Beebe Estate site. It will also involve redressing prior repairs, replacing capstones. The project went out to bid after we received the appropriation. All the bids came in excess of the project estimate. We are in a position to accept the lowest bid. The deadline is next week. If we are not in a position to accept that, we will have to go back to square one. I'm told by our consultant, David Hancock, that we will need even more money given the state of construction costs rising and issues with the pandemic and related federal projects and things like that, that next year it will be even more expensive. So the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee, was excellent. They invited the Historical Commission to do this special application off-cycle to seek this additional funding appropriation. They expedited it for hearing. We went to the hearing last week. They did the hearing on a special night, so everybody is working, you know, we're thrilled, the Historical Commission's thrilled that everybody's helping move this project along. The mayor received the CPC recommendation, immediately issued the recommendation to the council. City Clerk Lucy, I spoke with Councilor Murphy. You were great to allow this to be docketed last week. We met the deadline, so I believe it is properly posted. You just needed to suspend your own rules to hear it. So if anyone has any specific questions about the project, it's the same project you heard about last year, or earlier this year, I should say, and approved the $150,000. It's just that the project costs more than that. And all the bids have also been analyzed. I wanted to mention that. So they're all in proper order. And again, we're just ready to accept the bid and move forward with the project. Thank you.
Michelle, what's the additional money that we're looking for? How much?
$50,000.
$50,000? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm in support of the project. I think the only thing I'd say is the capstones that are being replaced were likely stolen, and they probably were stolen over time. Is there going to be something done to the existing capstones and the ones that will be replaced so that they cannot be stolen in the future?
Not 100% sure of that. I do know that several have been stolen and several have actually been pushed and they're behind the wall, is what our consultant told us after the inspection. I'm not sure how they're attached or fixed, but the whole wall is going to be, you know, rehabilitated And I'm told that we've located a quarry that has granite from other projects elsewhere in the state, so we're actually gonna be able to match the granite to the original granite when we create the new capstone, so that was good news. But I'm sure it will be somehow affixed. I'm not exactly sure technically how that's done. And all the work will be done in accordance with the department, the Secretary of the Interior standards, which is required, so the federal historic standards.
And the only other thing I'd say is if we could make sure that we include the DPW and public facilities, because there's some kind of overlap between their responsibilities in the project.
Yes,
Just so
it's
that-
their application, actually, co-application with the Historical Commission. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilor Condon.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you for bringing this forward. I think it's extremely important that we move on it quick. If not, we're going to lose the construction season. And that's going to set us way back, particularly if we have to go out to rebid. So I'm 100% in favor of it. I can remember 60 years ago going down that hill, and if you were lucky, you didn't hit a tree. If you got by the trees, you had to face the wall. So we took a couple good hits in the head. But it has to be done for sure. So I'm in favor, 100%.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Murphy. I'm sorry, Councilor DiMaria?
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to ask if you were going faster than 25 miles an hour, Councilor Condon. Oh, boy. Thank you, Michelle, for filling in the gaps. I have also been told that if we didn't move forward with this, then the RFP would have had to go back out to all the bidders, and we would have had to start all over again. So like in construction projects, things go over, and certainly I'm in 100% support of this. This is a beautiful historical wall, and anything we can do, I would be in support of. So thank you very much. Maybe we can actually vote it on the floor tonight rather than send it to committee. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I don't see.
Yeah, Michelle, so, I mean, is the bid then for $200,000, or is there some level of contingency built in? I mean, often, having been a project manager, often it's good to have a little bit more money in the bank than necessarily when you sign the contract, just in case. Is that built in, or I'm just curious as to, is there a differential there that's, we just rounded up a little bit, or just included a little bit of a contingency just in case?
Yes, I'm just going to quickly look at that. I believe the lowest bid was, I'm just going to look at this analysis sheet here, if I can find it. Just give me a minute. Okay, so I'll read from if you don't mind, our consultant David Hancock's analysis. And this was submitted, so this is part of the CPA funding application for this additional funding. The base contract value of the bids ranges from $189,940 to $286,735. An additive alternative is to additionally straighten and plumb secondary gate posts at Elm Street, received bids from $4,500 to $26,000. Acceptance of the alternative is completely up to the city, so the option can be exercised at any time. So I understood that, and then he talks about the documented construction estimates. The estimated base cost was $192 with the additive of $4,680. I guess there are certain line items, so there is some flexibility and there is some contingency. I don't think I answered that clearly, but it's not exactly 50,000 we need to do the project. I believe 50,000 would allow us to accept the lowest bid, and then there's this optional contingency of this other part of the project that we can add on later. He also thought, when we testified at the hearing last week, he stated that sometimes the costs aren't exactly what are projected either in the cost estimate. So of course the bids are public, so the bidder is going to see, you know, what the others bid and everything. So I have more of the detailed analysis if you want it. But
So it looks like this will make sure that we have the $200,000 will allow us to accept the low bid, maybe the alternative, I mean, whether that's, so it sounds like we can accept the low bid, maybe have a little bit of money for an alternative or some contingency, so.
Right,
So
just- yeah.
that's good that we have a little cushion built in and that maybe we could grab one of those alternatives. I mean, that's
Yeah.
often how you structure the bids so that you know, the alternative is often that stretch, so no. I'm definitely supportive. I mean, we have a lot of wonderful walls. I know there's ones at Trafton. I think this is, if this works out as a good model, I'd love to see other walls in the city. They're really a treasure. I mean, a lot of them were built in the 1930s, and it really a unique characteristic of Malden and New England, so I think it's a very worthwhile investment in our community. Thank you.
yeah, so there is I'll just add quickly, there is an item, he says, that's called contingency or add alternate. So that was part of all the bids, I guess. But we would, the bid expiration is November 4th, so we would definitely need you to, please, if possible, act on this tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor Murphy.
President, and just for those listening, if someone's confused as to why it's not, you know, to the penny, just remember that all of this money stays in the CPC fund until it's actually utilized. So if for some reason, in the end, this is a $195,000 job, $5,000 will still remain in the CPA fund. So it doesn't go to waste, it doesn't get lost, et cetera. So on that note, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this request.
Who's going to second on that? Councilor Condon has seconded that we, the order to adopt, made by Councilor Murphy, seconded by Councilor Condon. Clerk, please call the roll. Clerk, please call the roll.
Kamel. Kamel, yes. Condon. Crow. Yes. DeMaria. Linehan. Yes. Murphy.
Murphy, yes.
O'Malley. Skeeka.
Yes.
Winslow. Anderson.
Anderson, yes. So that order is adopted. Next order of business.
Thank you
Docket is
very
clear.
much.
Oh, you're
Thank
certainly
you.
welcome. Thank you, Michelle. The docket is clear. And next week is election. Must be some personal privilege request here. Councilor Crowe is first to ask, I believe. Let's see. Councilor Crowe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Even before election, this Friday evening, the Junior Aid Association of Malden will be, and some of my sister junior aiders, will be hosting a trunk or treat event from 5 to 6:30. I know that the Chamber of Commerce has their trick or treat event in the Malden Square from 3 to 5, so then come on down for more treats. The plan is still to have it on the bike path on Canal Street, although if it is inclement weather, we do have a rain location, which is inside Anthony's. So you can just cross the street and make sure you come. We also have the Ward 1 Pumpkin Patch will be a part of the trunk or treat event. So you can go, my goal was to get at least 20 cars, and as of today, I have 20 cars. So I might push a couple more. And then you can get a pumpkin and just really have some fun, connect with some neighbors. Hopefully we'll be outside if Mother Nature works with us. But I hope to see everybody on Friday night, and make sure you vote on Tuesday.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kamel.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I think maybe reiterating Council Winslow had shared previously, but on Sunday, October 31st, Halloween at 11 a.m. at Trafton Park, there'll be a Halloween celebration there, so we're pretty excited about that, and want to thank all the hard work that was done by the Maplewood Association. There'll be raffles and music and fun, and it'll be a great time for everybody, so come on down and enjoy Halloween.
Thank you, Councilor Kamel. Councilor Seeker.
Thank you. You shut me. There we go. Are we on TV? We're on TV? Okay. Can we do a moment of silence for Joe Levine and Peter Levine's father, Mr. Levine, who passed away the other day at 90 years old? Okay.
So Councilor Seeker has asked that we stand for a moment of silence in honor of Mr. Joe Levine. Jerry Levine, who passed away at the age of 90 years old, the father of our publisher, of our writer of Joe Levine, and Peter Levine, who's passed away at the young age of 90 years old. May God bless his soul. A moment of silence, please. And Councilor Murphy?
The Wood, just wanted to announce that the Wood 5 annual Halloween party will be held on Saturday, this coming Saturday, the 30th, from 3 to 5. And once again, we have a pumpkin patch, and we'll have pizza and food and a DJ, and we expect to have a wonderful, spooktacular time. So come on down to Forestdale Park. So Saturday, 3 to 5 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Winslow.
Yes, I thank Councilor Kamel for bringing up Maplewood Halloween. It looks like good weather for Sunday. I think school committee member Joe Gray, he did sell his soul to the devil to make sure we had good weather for that. But it looks like good weather for Sunday, so hope everybody in the Maplewood area and across the city can come out for that. Just for elections, for folks who have asked for a mail-in ballot, just remind you to get those in to make sure that they get counted, and you can actually still come down to City Hall, as Carol Ann had talked to us the next few days, to come and vote in person if you can't make it on Election Day. And otherwise, remind everybody that Election Day, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., you can go down to your local precinct. And for folks in Ward 6, and particularly Precinct 6-1, you have a new voting location, Club 24, which is right across the street from the charter school where people have voted in the past. So, but just come out and vote, and it's important. Your vote helps shape the future of the city. So everybody come out, and we can see where we go from there. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Councilor. So for those of you who are running for election or re-election, I wish you all the best. To the voters of Malden, I encourage you to get out on Tuesday. As Councilor Winslow has said, you still have time now to do early voting by coming here to Malden City Hall and voting. And I believe the deadline for submission of a mail-in ballot is when? Tomorrow at 5. The request for the ballot is tomorrow at 5, according to our election official, Mr. Lucy. I see no other lights, and so on Councilor Crow's motion that we adjourn, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are adjourned. Was it a tough one, Ollie? Yeah. Okay. In order to hear it through here. If this is on, I